Greetings and welcome back to 303. We are in Junior English, and we now turn to the great, controversially great E. Cummings. I'm with you on 778, 779. There's so many ways to kind of introduce you to this genius poet. We're going to start, first of all, in your notes by just pointing out that E. Cummings, in many ways, broke all the rules in regards to poetry. But in the process of breaking the rules, he set such a high standard for poetic creativity that in many ways, some poets today believe that Cummings is one of the greatest of American poets, especially because of the ways in which he was able to, for lack of a better phrase, attack the system by attacking the very notion of how poems are supposed to look. Now, we're going to spend some time here. We got about 5 poems, actually, that we'll be looking at in a sequence here that talk about modern poetry, and Cummings is one of the first for us to study. We want to first of all point out right away that Cummings' dates are 1894 to 1962. There they are on page 779. I love the quote at the bottom of that page. It's pure Cummings. It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. If W.H. Auden's poem, Unknown Citizen, is a poem that says the tragedy of modernity is that everybody pretty much ends up the same, a conformist society, Cummings is a voice that says, not everybody has to end up that way. Let's read a little bit about his life really quickly on 779. After working in the French ambulance corps and spending 3 months behind bars as a political prisoner during World War I, Edward Elton Cummings studied painting in Paris and subsequently began writing poetry in New York City. A graduate of Harvard University, his first published poems appeared in the Harvard Monthly. Though some critics attacked the unconventional style of his poetry. Let's write that down right now at 2B. Unconventional style of his poetry. You're going to see this here in a second. Cummings' work was popular with general readers. People admired his playful use of language. Let's write that down. Playful use of language. His distinctive use of grammar and punctuation, and his interest in a poem's appearance. Let's write that down. He was very interested in the way the poem laid out on the page. A sensitivity that might have stemmed from his talent as a painter. Cummings also became known for his concern for the individual and his discerning eye for life's ironies. The next heading, form versus content. Although Cummings' poems tend to be unconventional in form and style, they generally express traditional ideas. In his finest poems, Cummings explores the customary poetic terrain of love and nature, but makes innovative use of grammar and punctuation to reinforce meaning. Many of his poems also contain comic touches as Cummings addresses the confusing aspects of modern life. Cummings was also a skillful satirist who used his poems to challenge accepted notions and fixed beliefs. You'll remember that we mentioned satire when we did W.H. Auden's Unknown Citizen to be sarcastic satire. Cummings received a number of awards for his work, including the Boston Fine Arts Poetry Festival Award and the Belgian Prize in Poetry. In 1968, 6 years after his death, a volume of his poetry, The Complete Poems, 1913 to 1968, was published. At the time of his death, he was the second most widely read poet in the United States after Robert Frost. So right away we can see the significance of this poet. It's interesting in 303 because for many years I've pointed out to my junior students that Cummings has always been with us. He is there in the corner of the room, in the frame there, kind of looking over all of our students. One of my students saw Cummings as such an important poet and artist that he used Cummings for one of his famous works there in the corner. Let's take a look at the literary analysis topic on 778. An author's style. We want to write this down at 2B right away. An author's style is his or her unique way of writing. Many factors determine style, including word choice, sentence structure, and the arrangement of words on a page. E. E. Cummings' style is among the most distinctive of any American poet. He uses a range of experimental elements and techniques, including the following: unconventional syntax or sentence structure, including the splitting up of words and phrases and the mixing up of parts of speech. 2. The bending and breaking of grammatical rules. 3. The unorthodox use of lowercase and uppercase letters. 4. A minimal or unorthodox use of punctuation. 5. The elimination of spaces between certain words and characters. And finally, 6. The use of typographical symbols to create visual impact. Cummings' style is not just for show. It's a key part of his meaning and affects how the reader experiences the poems. As you read, think about the effect Cummings' style has on your understanding of each poem. And then in your reading strategy, the quest is here to paraphrase, summarize at level 1. Notice the 2 vocabulary words as well. Now, just to kind of prove to you what we're saying, I'm going to have you turn to page 780, and I'm going to give you a few seconds to read the poem Old Age Sticks. We're going to look at 2 E. E. Cummings poems. The first one is Old Age Sticks. The second one is Anyone Lived in a Pretty How Town. Let's start with Old Age Sticks. And I want you to read the poem for yourself silently. Now, I know we don't do this very regularly. Normally, we just start by a reading of the poem by the instructor or a professional reader. But now I want you to try and do it on your own. Go ahead and read this poem really quickly. You should be looking with me now at page 780. Page 780. And go ahead and try and read that poem really quickly, all for yourself. I'll give you a few seconds to do it. Good luck. Go ahead. Okay. Now, I've had students that look at this poem on 780 called Old Age Sticks, and they struggle to read the poem. Of course, word order, the way the lines get broken up, this thing about parentheses and all of that. We're obviously going to have to talk about this at level 2B in a second. Let's listen to a professional reader read this poem really quickly. And now all I want you to do is just follow along and just watch how the poem gets read by one professional reader. Old Age Sticks.
Old Age Sticks by E. E. Cummings. Old age sticks up keep off signs, and youth yanks them down. Old age cries, no trespass and pass, youth laughs, sing. Old age scolds, forbidden, stop, mustn't, don't. And youth goes right on growing old.
All right, so let's spend some time now with this poem and the ways in which Cummings plays, can we say this out loud? Cummings plays games with us of a kind, right? Now, first of all, we can summarize very, very easily what this poem is about once we have it read out loud. Old age versus what? This is a poem about what? Old age versus young age. You got it. So let's write this down right away at level 1. We're going to ask the simple question at level 1 as we summarize the poem. What does he say about old people? What does he say about young people and how they're different? Let's play the game together, shall we? Notice right away the lack of punctuation. Do you see this? So for example, much like what we were playing in the game with William Carlos Williams, we will find often that Cummings does not do what you would expect in terms of grammar. Right? Do you notice this? So notice, the word old is the first word of the poem, but it is not what? Right, not capitalized. Do you see that? But notice the keep off is capitalized, right? Then notice that you've got this thing with the use of parenthetics, right, with the after the word signs. Now this is a poem, most of E. Cummings' poetry is like this, where to really talk about the poem, you got to be physically looking at the poem, right? So let's play the game now. Old age sticks up keep off signs. In other words, how would you put that in level 1? What do you think that means? Old age tells young people to what? Right, stop, keep off, don't touch that, that's important and sacred. You should do it the way we've always done it. But then notice the next lines. And youth yanks them down. In other words, old people put up the signs that say don't walk on the grass, and young people walk around and yank up the signs or kick the signs over or whatever. So already we're seeing some tension in the poem between old age, old people who are going to be more conservative and say don't, and young people that are going to say not listening, right? He continues. Old age cries, right? No, tress, and pass. Now, of course, this is Cummings' creative way to say don't trespassing, right? The same basic idea. Youth laughs, right? Sing. Now, what's fascinating about the word sing is, of course, youth can be a word that either is a singular or a plural. And, of course, with the word sing, it's going to then be, right, a plural understanding. In other words, old people will tell young people what not to do and limit them. And young people have a tendency to want to sing, break the rules, we might say, right? Old age scolds. This is a word we don't use very much today. Of course, to scold means to kind of say no, or whatever. Forbidden, stop, mustn't, don't. Notice the spelling of the word mustn't at line 15, 16. Do you see that? Notice how the word must, and then the contraction for not, right? And then don't. And youth goes right on growing old. Notice that line 19 and 20, Cummings does something very interesting with the spelling of the word growing. Did you see that? So that when you first look at it, you think that it's going to be something like youth goes right on, grrr, like a sound, like, you know what I mean? Like grumbling or something. And then growing old. Now at 2a, let's just pause for a moment and ask a quick question about this poem at 2a. What is it that is a major theme or message of this poem? Jot down a couple for yourself. Some students have pointed out that this poem suggests there is a clear difference between old people and young people. Old people lay down the rules. Young people do what? Break the rules, right? There's kind of an understanding that there's this generation gap that Margaret Mead wrote in Culture and Commitment in 1972, coined a phrase, generation gap, this idea that you have two different sides of experience. You have old people, and then, setting the rules, and then you have young people that like to violate or break the rules, okay? But there's a second reading of this poem for many students, and they will point out that this isn't really a poem about how old people and young people are different, but rather they are the same people going through different phases of their life, right? In other words, old people once were young people. And what did they do when they were young? Well, they kicked the sign down that said, keep off the grass, or don't go here, or don't go there. They were the ones singing. But then, as young people age, the evolutionary process, right? They become increasingly old. Notice the last line, youth goes right on growing old. In other words, another possible message here is youth inevitably ends up looking like the very people that they had serious problems with when they were young. That is a fascinating idea, right? The notion that, think about the adult right now in your life who you really don't want to end up like, and the chances are really good you probably will. Some will say that's kind of a depressing idea, right? Surely not. I think the other side of this is sometimes, and we'll get to this at 3B in a moment, but it's sometimes hard to imagine the people in your life, parents, guardians, whatever, in your life, at your age. Do you know what I mean? You can see photographs of them maybe, of that time, but it's always fascinating to ask what they were really like. I've been in 303 long enough that now I'm obviously teaching seniors, juniors, and seniors of students that I once had. And one of the questions often that the second generation of student will ask me is, dude, what was my dad like when he was in 303? They want to kind of understand, because obviously changed, right? You change as you get older, and this poem obviously playing that game. Okay, at 2B, this is obviously pretty easy for us. Cummings plays, now you understand why we made such a deal of it, right? Cummings plays all kinds of games with the language. Hey, just do this for yourself. Jot down the one example from this poem, Old Age Sticks, that works the best for you in terms of the way he jacks with the language. The games he plays with punctuation, with grammar, with splitting up words. Anybody can write the word growing as one word. Notice Cummings, he will break the word up with GR space and then the 20th line, O-W-I-N-G, right? Of course, owing is an interesting word, right, in itself. When you add GR in front of it, it's growing. But it's owing. Do you see how he plays that game? In other words, he's always making these really kind of subtle suggestions, like basically youth has a lot to owe that it owes to old age, and the old age has a lot to owe to the youth, right? Some students have pointed out the title, Old Age Sticks, starts to look like sticks you would pick up off the ground. They don't realize that the word stick here means to thrust into the ground. That is to say, it's a verb. Some students have pointed out in today's parlance that the word sticks almost looks like the word sucks. So there's an immediate eye kind of, old age sucks. No, that's not what he's saying. Old age sticks, right? Okay, well, there's your first foray into E.E. Cummings. Let's jump across the page to 781 and let's look at the second offering. Anyone lived in a pretty how town? And right away you'll play the game of asking, what? Look at your background information on 781 really quickly. Cummings wrote these poems late in life. After an eventful youth, he settled down to enjoy his family farm in New Hampshire. The poems from this period tend to be gentle and even joyful. Now, growing up in a small town, if you have, certainly now living in a small town, you may find this poem very interesting. You're going to ask this question, and I'd write this question down right away at level 1, is he making fun of small provincial towns, or is he celebrating small provincial towns? Now, as we did with the first poem, I'm going to give you a few seconds to just read this on your own. Actually, try and read this poem on your own. Having read the first poem, it'll be a little bit easier to read the second poem. Go ahead and give it a chance here for a second. Try and read through this poem, and then we'll engage. Go ahead, read it for yourself on 781. Go ahead. All right, let's now play the game ourselves together of reading this poem. Try as best you can to keep up now with our professional reader, and we'll play the same game that we played the last time. Let's take a look at this poem, all right?
Anyone lived in a pretty how town by E.E. Cummings. Anyone lived in a pretty how town, with up so floating many bells down. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, he sang his didn't, he danced his did. Women and men, both little and small, cared for anyone not at all. They sowed their isn't, they reaped their same. Sun, moon, stars, rain. Children guessed, but only a few, and down they forgot as up they grew, autumn, winter, spring, summer, that no one loved him more by more. When by now, and tree by leaf, she laughed his joy, she cried his grief. Bird by snow and stir by still, anyone's any was all to he. Someone's married their everyones, laughed their cryings and did their dance. Sleep, wake, hope, and then they said their nevers, they slept their dream. Stars, rain, sun, moon, and only the snow can begin to explain how children are apt to forget to remember with up so floating many bells down. One day anyone died, I guess, and no one stooped to kiss his face. Busy folk buried them side by side, little by little, and was by was. All by all, and deep by deep, and more by more they dream their sleep. No one and anyone, earth by April, wish by spirit, and if by yes. Women and men, both dong and ding, summer, autumn, winter, spring, reaped their sowing and went their came. Sun, moon, stars, rain.
Now, I've had students that look at this poem and they're like, you know, this one is a little more complicated poem to read. Jot down at 2B why. Why is this poem more difficult to understand than the first one? That seems a little bit more direct. Are you ready for this? In spite of the fact that the physical structure of the poem itself on the page, on page 780, Old Age Sticks, is actually more convoluted and difficult physically to look at initially. Anyone Lived in a Pretty How Town is a poem, however, that only works if you know who anyone is, and then another character in the poem, no one. Jot down